We are ready for our next panel. We are very fortunate to have as a moderator Taylor Locke. Taylor is a money reporter at CNBC, and I think one of the sharpest and hardest working reporters on the crypto beat. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Taylor Locke.
Thank you so much. You flatter me. Well, I'm very excited to be here today. We have some great panelists to discuss, the ever-growing crypto space. So I'd like to introduce Emily Parker. She's managing director of international content at CoinDesk. We also have Raj Damodaran. He's the executive vice president of blockchain, digital asset products, and digital partnerships at MasterCard. So we have a great group here with us today. Thank you both for joining. Before we jump in, just for full disclosure and transparency, I'd love to ask you both if you own any cryptocurrency or any other crypto assets. Maybe Emily, you can go first.
Yes, I do.
And Raj?
Yeah, I do as well, yeah.
So with that, and with your experience in the space, I'm sure that you guys have had a firsthand look at, the innovation. Obviously, it's evident growing, look from the outside looking in, but owning the assets yourself, working in the space, you've really had a handle on what's been going on. Raj, of course, I have to give a hat tip to Emily because I know she's discussed this with you in the past, but crypto and blockchain is obviously meant, among other things, to disrupt traditional financial systems. One may argue it's aimed to disrupt MasterCard, or a company like MasterCard. So how have you seen in your position blockchain technology be disruptive, and how do you foresee companies like MasterCard kind of going in with that disruption and not being left behind?
Yeah, thanks for first of all having me. It's great to be here and great to be with Emily again. And we had a great discussion the other day and I hope to continue it here. To answer your question, we very much see this as a technology that we can partner with the crypto industry on, as something that we can offer in terms of helping a way for crypto companies to scale. The way we look at this is that there is a large asset. I think I don't keep count every day, but 1.5 trillion or whatever, 2 trillion in terms of the overall asset base. And whenever that such a big asset base gets created, a lot of people want to use it, not just the original enthusiasts that got this whole industry started, but it is going mainstream. And we believe we can actually help in that journey for the crypto companies. Couple of examples to give is, a simple card product that we are known for is actually providing access to this trillions of assets, enabling consumers to access their assets the way they see fit. It is all about choice. We want to provide consumers, merchants, and everyone in the ecosystem a choice on how they use their savings, how they use their currencies. And we have one of the largest networks out there in the world that reaches hundreds of different markets in the world in a safe and secure way. So I think we're here to help. We're here to help the companies scale in this space.
And that definitely makes sense. And I know you've partnered with large companies in the space, with helping with Gemini and companies of that sort. So I guess with that in mind, what kind of predictions do you foresee from what you've been working on or just witnessing in the space? What kind of disruptions do you see with blockchain in particular going forward, looking ahead maybe 5-10 years?
Oh, 5-10 years, I wouldn't venture a prediction. Definitely not. And we are really. I think we can easily share this one, which is I think we are just seeing the beginnings of the space, right? So we think that some of the use cases, what I really love to see, and I think we can help, is a lot of the use cases are in emerging within the community, crypto community, and starting to branch out. As it starts to branch out, obviously there is a lot of discussion on, what is the right regulatory treatment, what are the right kind of business models that need to emerge. All of this, I think we can help. We have a large network. We've invested in this space as a technology. We've looked at blockchain as more of an R&D stuff, even 5-6 years ago. But ever since, we've actually been helping governments enter into this space as well from a central bank digital currency space. I think we can play a helpful bridging role between the governments and the traditional finance industry and the new emerging crypto industry as well. And we've done this before. It's not that the first time we are doing this. When the fintech innovation happened in other sectors, related sectors in the finance, we very much leaned in and helped all of those companies scale. And that's the approach that we will. Right.
And on that note, as you know, this space has evolved and quite frankly hit the mainstream, especially this year, we've seen a heightened focus from the US regarding regulation. We've seen repeated interest in banning Bitcoin from China since 2013. That's nothing new, but across the world, we've seen more of a heightened focus on creating a regulatory framework. So Emily, I wanted to ask you, especially with your experience in the space, I would love to hear kind of what regulatory changes you actually foresee being implemented and how that may impact perhaps the market for retail investors in particular.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So, you know, as Raj said, it's impossible to make predictions in the crypto space. But, you know, from what we know now, I guess the largest lesson here is that crypto is now too big to ignore. And in some ways, that's a good thing, right? And we see that in the United States. It's now crypto is firmly in the crosshairs of regulators all over the country. I mean, we saw how, for example, there was a crypto tax provision that helped hold up the entire infrastructure bill. Regulators, lawmakers in the United States know that they just can't ignore this asset class anymore. So, you know, some people are going to be spooked by that because there is always the danger of over-regulation. But ultimately, it's probably a good thing because one of the problems in the United States is that there has been a lot of regulatory uncertainty. People don't really know where crypto fits in. There's still a lot of people out there who associate Bitcoin with criminal activity, for example. You know, every state has a different way of doing things. For example, regulating cryptocurrency exchanges varies state by state. Also, in the United States, there's a bunch of different agencies that regulate cryptocurrency. So, you know, you have the CFTC, you have the SEC, you have Treasury getting involved, you have the IRS. So it's like kind of confusing. And in general, confusion is not a good thing for financial markets. So we've starting to see some reports. For example, there was a report out last week by Bloomberg saying that the Biden administration was weighing an executive order on cryptocurrency. And this executive order ostensibly would push for greater oversight among federal agencies and also greater education among the federal government about what cryptocurrency is. So I think these are all actually positive trends. We've also had Powell and Gensler both basically assuring the American public that that the United States has no plans to ban cryptocurrency. I don't actually think that there was ever a threat of the US banning cryptocurrency, but maybe some people thought there was. So I think even though, you know, from the outside, when you see all this news of US regulation, it could look a little scary, like, oh, the US is trying to control this market. But ultimately, again, it's probably a good thing because A, it's an acknowledgement that crypto is here to stay, and B, it might root out some of the uncertainty in the market.
And I know that you especially have you know, a lot of knowledge about internationally overseas, how the regulatory landscape there has kind of unfolded. What do you think of, I guess every time China reiterates their stance, the markets, you know, dip, you know, there's a lot of adverse response there. What do you think beside that, you know, what do you think going forward? Will there be any tremendous impact, you know, for retail investors? Do you think that as the US kind of carves out a framework here, it will impact a bit less when China reiterates their stance on these things? You know, what do you think, you know, from your knowledge and what you're looking at overseas, how do you feel like that will impact what's going on here for retail investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've spent a lot of time in the Chinese crypto world, and you know what's happening in China is really interesting. Not because, as you just said, this crackdown is nothing new. China has never been a huge fan of Bitcoin. This is not a new story. You know, China's stance has always been, we're pretty wary of cryptocurrency, but we like blockchain technology to a certain degree. You know, they will embrace certain aspects of the technology while not really
think we've
really liking more speculative market, but it definitely gotten more intense. And I think what's most interesting about the Chinese crackdown is that with this latest iteration, which I think you could say is more extreme than before in the sense that they've really cracked down on mining, and they're also closing some of the loopholes for crypto trading inside the country. What's interesting is that it hasn't really impacted the market all that much. In fact, Bitcoin, yes, we've seen some brief dips, but it's basically been on a tear since then. So I think we're seeing that Chinese regulations are actually having less and less of an impact on the global crypto market. And so, yeah, I think going forward, it's probably showing that Bitcoin is resilient to these kind of crackdowns, and it's probably healthy for the market as a whole.
Raj, when these types of announcements come to play, whether it be US focused or overseas, do you notice any, I guess, when you're working with these big brands, any institutional investor, response or anything of concern there? Or are they just kind of used to it? Or they, because we see a large price movement. So I was curious if in what you're working with, in the brand you're working with, if there's a response from institutional whales.
Yeah, not so much about institutions or institutional response, but I think to Emily's point, we generally welcome a lot more clarity in the regulations in the space. There is actually some positive things happening, and Emily already talked about the US. There was also a European effort to come up with a legislation on this topic. Rules help, because rules, what it does is it allows people to figure out what's possible, what they can do, and people tend to invest more. It's not that crypto is lacking investment, but it'll even provide a lot more clarity for people to enter into space and settle on their business models about how they want to scale. So yeah, we'll welcome that engagement. There is ongoing dialogue in multiple jurisdictions on this topic. Yeah, it's a positive development, I think. It can happen faster for sure. More alignment could help between various jurisdictions, all of that. But I welcome more thoughtful approach on this across the world.
Definitely. So I guess to that point, many in the crypto space, more particularly when, as you mentioned, Emily, the legislation was kind of thrown into the infrastructure bill regarding the crypto broker definition. That kind of caused a lot of fuss, and understandably so. But I guess more toward that, if more well thought out regulation would potentially be helpful. But there's the argument from those in the crypto space that it may stifle innovation here in the US and actually push business overseas with less well thought out regulation. To that point, would you agree with that outlook? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I would agree that I think most people would agree that the crypto tax provision in the infrastructure bill didn't really make any sense. So that definitely is an example of not well thought out regulation. I mean, I don't know how many people here are following it, but basically the simplest way to put it is that there was a reporting requirement in the infrastructure bill that applied to a wide range of actors that would not be able to meet these reporting requirements just because of the way that they are structured. Just the simplest way of putting it. And so basically it sounds like whoever drafted that language probably did not have that much of a deep knowledge of how the crypto economy works. So, that's not even over-regulation. That's just kind of like, I don't know what that was. So yeah, I mean, I think, for example, with this executive order that there are reports of, one of the things in that report was that it would compel federal agencies to get more educated about cryptocurrency and understand the industry better. And that would hopefully lead to more informed regulation that actually made sense.
Definitely. And with this conversation, the talk of, stable coins and CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies, also come up very often. I know Jerome Powell, has discussed that we're in the process of researching one in the US, but overseas, there are multiple countries already developing these or have these in place already. Raj, I know that you mentioned earlier too, that, MasterCard has really worked with a lot of central banks in development of these. What do you see for the space? Do you actually foresee, a use for them here? Do you feel like, what are you seeing in their development, and kind of what do you feel like the use of a CBDC may overcome a private currency, even though it's, obviously Bitcoin and a CBDC would be extremely different because Bitcoin is more decentralized. But do you foresee kind of the use of one being so mainstream that perhaps it outweighs a Bitcoin or the market as a whole?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It is really not one versus the other. We really don't, it's all about use cases. I think it's about, you talk about private currencies. We already use a private currency called bank deposits, right? So, and that has worked very well with the actual currency issued by the government, which are the physical notes. So both have their use cases and where it apply. I don't really see this as one versus the other. I think we will go to, for example, when central bank digital currencies come out, and the first thing that the central banks are looking for is utility. How do you get this use whether it's a wholesale, how do you get it to the institutional use? If it is retail, how do you get it to everyday consumers use? Not really thinking about all the intricacies of setting up wallets and acquiring all of this. They're looking for simple ways to deliver. So when it came, I have a simple example here that when we worked with Bahamas, when they wanted to roll out a simple card access, provided everyday utility to that currency. Whatever the objective of the government is in terms of rolling out, actually the objectives vary depending on the jurisdiction that you are. Some of them are looking at financial inclusion, others are looking at reduced use of physical cash and trying to replace that with a digital liability. Utility is important. So that's where I think we can help in figuring out what the right designs are and helping roll out and get into everyday consumers and merchants in a simple way. They need to be able to use this like they use currency. That's when that utility would come. And it can coexist with other forms. Each will have its use cases. Have we all, the industry, figured out all the right use cases for all the right instruments? Not yet. But I think it'll add to the dialogue, and we are here to help figure that out. We have what we call as a virtual test platform that allows governments to kind of fine tune different parameters, design parameters of this, and some of the governments are using this to figure out what's the right design for the currency. Yeah, I think it's early stage. It's all about the use cases, I would say, and they are different for each currency or each asset, digital asset, I should say.
Definitely makes sense. Emily, obviously, we've heard Powell say that they will take their time, and that makes sense in rolling something out if they do. Do you think that this would be potentially something that we see in the US in the near future? If not, I know that there's a lot of talk around stable coins as well, which is separate, but they're often surrounded by a lot of controversy in regard to, what they're pegged to. Is they're supposed to be pegged to reserve assets or fiat? Do you foresee kind of a widespread implementation here of that? Obviously, it's difficult to predict, the future of money and how things will be handled and used. But do you think that here, overseas, we've seen it? Do you think that in the US we'll see that as well?
So it's really unclear so far if the US will adopt a CBDC. They've been pretty slow about it compared to other countries, in particular China. I fully agree with everything that Raj said, in particular this idea that a CBDC would somehow like replace Bitcoin or replace stablecoins. In fact, I think a CBDC could just reinforce the need for other kinds of cryptocurrencies, because a CBDC is exactly that. It's a central bank issued digital currency. And Bitcoin by definition is independent of a central bank, right? So, if anything, I think one of the biggest concerns in the United States, and in this sense, I'm really glad that, they're taking their time, are the privacy implications, right? This idea of a government issued digital money, can this be tracked? Is this going to really cause some infringements on citizen privacy? I think that there probably will be some privacy trade-off somewhere just because it is a centralized central bank digital currency. So, I think that hopefully, if there is a CBDC, it would not in any way seek to replace Bitcoin or to replace cash, because cash remains the most private form of money. So hopefully it would just be one tool among many in the US.
Well, great. Well, now I'd love to open it up to audience questions.
We have a question from the virtual audience. This question is for Raj. MasterCard recently partnered with Paxos. Can you tell us a little bit more about that partnership?
Yeah, it's we talked about private currencies recently. One of the things that we're doing is leaning in to support the crypto community. When we issue crypto cards, we have a number of cards around the world pointing to crypto balances in various wallets. Most of this demand is most of these partners are interested in staying crypto native. End of the day, when their liabilities need to be settled, they'd love to stay in crypto native and settle with us using stable coins. And the reason for that is very simple. They're at that time, using their either Bitcoin or Ether balances and turning into assets that they can settle us with. We find we're able to kind of partner with Paxos and others in the industry to offer that as an option. So that's actually, I'm glad to report that it's going really, really well. And there are more and more partners are in the, are waiting to be added to that program. So it's been a great success story for us. And this is just a great one example of how we are leaning into support to the crypto world.
Hello, yes. Thank you, Raj and Emily. Quick question. As Bitcoin and other crypto asset valuations keep rising, are there any risks to all the new overnight wealth generated? And can that be a self-fulfilling prophecy, which leads to like the devaluation of fiat currency, which would in turn, lead to higher crypto prices?
Raj, do you want to take that or should I?
No, I actually didn't quite come through what the question was. So if you heard it, go for it.
I heard the first part about, I think I heard it correctly, is that over generating overnight wealth and how that could be dangerous. And the last part I didn't hear very clearly though.
Hello? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the last part, sorry about that. The last part was, would that be a self-fulfilling prophecy, or could it lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy where all, the higher and new wealth leads to the valuation of fiat currency, which would in turn lead to higher crypto values, like just necessitating people to hold crypto in order to keep their wealth?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. I don't know if that is the part about the devaluation of fiat currency. I haven't actually heard that discussed that much as a risk. The generating of overnight wealth is definitely a risk. I mean, we saw that particularly with, like, for example, not to single out one token, but like the Dogecoin boom, right? Like the rise of the Dogecoin millionaires. And I think, there was some concern about what would happen if a token like that collapsed overnight. But I mean, that's a separate issue, right? That's more about like just people generating a lot of wealth and losing it quickly because they invested in instruments that they may or not be that knowledgeable about. But on the fiat currency point, I don't know, Raj, if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I think it really depends on the utility of it. I don't think it's really one versus the other kind of approach. These currencies, for example, we don't consider some of these currencies as a pure payment currencies for an everyday use because of that overnight volatility and how it doesn't kind of lend itself to common consumer good experience on the sender side and the receive side. I think it's very important at this stage. So that's why we tend to look at them as more investment assets, and they're great investment assets. And people actually want liquidity out of the assets as well for occasional use when they're are spending that at let's say merchant location. And that's what our crypto card program provides. But it's all about what people use it for. For a large majority of the Bitcoin holders are using it as investment assets at the moment.
With that, I think no more questions. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you both so much for joining. Round of applause for our panelists.